Hello, and welcome everyone to episode number 39 of the Wonder of Stuff Vodcast, broadcast live on Google Hangouts on air every weekend. Tonight, a Sunday. Even though it's a bank holiday in the UK, we've decided to, what we normally do is do it on Monday. We've decided to do it on a Sunday again, keeping it as always. This is the place where you'll find the news, the information, and the commentary on science, engineering, and technology from the past week and beyond, and anything else that interests us from inside our tiny little human brains. As always, my name is John Gardner, and to help us out on the journey to knowledge tonight, we have my colleagues Richard Smith and Rossi D is back.
Hello.
Say hello, chaps.
Hello, chaps.
Hey. How are you doing, Ross? Have you
Very
finished
well,
gallivanting around Europe?
Yes, quick whistle-stop tour of Cologne, Dusseldorf and Spa for the Grand Prix.
Excellent.
Thoroughly enjoyable. Far too
Formula
hot.
One was good?
It was good, but far too hot. I was packed for wet weather, lots of waterproofs that didn't see the light day. But no, it was very good.
Good. Well, we kept the side up at this end. We managed to talk drivel for 2 lots of 45 minutes. Quite well, actually, I think, Richard. Yes. So no end to our skills of talking rubbish. Good. Right. Let's get started on this week's exciting episode, and it's actually yours, Ross. You're going to talk about electromagnetic hypersensitivity, I believe.
And just briefly before we start chatting with Richard, this does actually sort of follow on from a previous discussion we had, which was Noel Edmonds talking about this electromagnetic smog in his electric mat to try and get rid of it. But it's different than that. This is basically prompted by the fact that this week, a woman in France has actually won a disability grant for the fact that she suffers from electromagnetic hypersensitivity. So she's actually won a grant that says she can claim €800 per month for the next 3 years to help with her suffering for what is essentially an idiopathic condition. So there's no actual scientific reason for the condition. And she's managed to win this disability grant. So I mean, I thought I'd look into this because the articles were saying that who the World Health Organization recognizes electromagnetic hypersensitivity. And I thought that's interesting because if it's idiopathic, how can they recognize it as being a condition? But it looks like what they basically do is they recognize that people definitely suffer from something. So the effects of this, it's all self-reported effects, but it's things like headaches, muscle aches, burning sensations, rashes, supposedly when they're around things like mobile phone masts, Wi-Fi, any sort of electromagnetic radiation. There's no scientific basis for the actual cracking up again. There's no scientific evidence for the actual causes of this. And they've actually done proper scientific tests, so double-blind tests with people who suffer from this condition, and there's absolutely no correlation between there being in the presence of an electromagnetic field or there not being one there. So what the World Health Organization are recognizing is there's something causing this, but it's not electromagnetic sensitivity. However, this woman still won a disability grant for it.
Is this anything to do, because there has been a lot of circumstantial evidence about power lines? Is that the same?
It's a similar sort of thing, yeah. I mean, apparently in the UK, there's a charity that campaigns for the recognition of this, called Electrosensitivity UK, and they say that lots of people in the UK...
Yeah, you sound back.
You sound sorted. Whatever happened?
I don't know what's going on. Lots of people do things like they complain when there's power lines being built, and they get things stopped, but they usually win it on a planning basis, not on any sort of medical basis, because there's no evidence for it. But it's just one of these things where it is being recognised and being acknowledged without any sort of actual cause for the condition. So it's quite interesting that it's not a medical diagnosis. There's the tests show there's nothing there, but the World Health Organization are recognizing it's been an actual condition.
it's a label that applies and describes something, but
Exactly.
what it pretends to describe, it's not quite that. There's loads of things like that, though, isn't there? Where, what springs to mind is a documentary that I watched about steroid abuse.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, well, at least there was a correlation. You're saying here there's no even a correlation, but with there was no link between the drug and the behaviors of the people. The people were like that, and those people are attracted to those drugs.
Yeah.
But the family seem hell bent on wanting something external to blame, or it's not really. I don't think it's really so much that they're not wanting to take ownership of it, or their children to take ownership of it, or whatever. It's more that it makes it very simple, so you can just say it's this.
There's a label on it.
Yeah, phenomenon. You can just say it's this, and that's easy to in people's minds psychologically. They can say we can campaign against it now. We know what it is.
Yeah. I mean, I feel a similar sort of thing with what would it be? Not hyperactivity, but there's things that kids what kids get labelled with, like sort of hyperactive kids. It's not hyperactivity, it's something else.
ADHD.
Yeah, ADHD. I find that label is used as a obviously purely from just observation, not from direct evidence or anything, just my own personal opinion. I think that label is probably bandied around to make an excuse for behaviour, because again, that's something that you can't test for that because it's a psychological thing. You can't, there's no way of measuring it's an idiopathic condition, so you can't be diagnosed with it, if you know what I mean, even though people are.
It's a tricky one because obviously you don't want to go as far as saying something like that's not real, because clearly the label describes a set of behaviours and therefore it's useful. But I see what you're saying. But then again, you could then, at the end of the day, you could then describe every sort of mental disorder as that, and you wouldn't want to just write those people off, because you can't put an umbrella around those people and know a set of treatments will work or will alleviate the symptoms or whatever. So it's useful in that sense. So I know what you're saying. It's not like dyslexia or something like that where it's very, very well defined. It's less well defined, yeah.
I mean, with this, the way this French woman's sort of case has been reported is that it's like a victory for acknowledging that this condition exists, even though in none of the court reports it says that is the condition that's given her which is wonderful. It's being reported that it's acknowledging that that's what she suffers from. Which I think is a shame.
Sorry, I missed what does she what is she attributing to the actual cause of this?
Well, she has claimed that she has this electromagnetic hypersensitivity.
Yeah, but how does she live under power lines? Is that what she's saying? Is
she's moved to a remote area in southwest of France that she lives in a barn with no electricity now. But she says that any gadgets, phones, electricity cause her headaches and palpitations and all this. So she's being given this disability allowance probably because she deserves it, because she's she's suffering from something. But it's not being acknowledged that she's suffering from electromagnetic hypersensitivity, but that's how it's being reported.
Right.
But she's won because she's saying she's got it.
So the French government haven't actually acknowledged this phenomenon.
They haven't recognised that as what she's suffering from.
They're actually giving her a disability grant, probably for a psychological disorder, effectively. Then.
Exactly. Yeah. And like I say, there's obviously something going on because people do suffer from this, and it does seem that it will be a psychological disorder, especially given the tests that they've done where they get people who suffer from it, and there's absolutely no correlation with whether there's a mobile phone near them or not. It's obviously psychological, so they are suffering from something. But unfortunately, here the label is now being used as being validated by this court case, even though it's not recognised as a condition anyway.
You wouldn't want to single people like these things. Often people poke fun when it's like, I'm not saying you are, but these things are often the source of humour when it's a small amount of people. But actually, there's hysterias, isn't there, that happen over the decades, over the centuries. There's been mass hysterias where actually large numbers of people have been pulled in by something which actually has no scientific credibility at all, and yet millions of people can get sucked into it.
Mm-hmm. But so if it's see, obviously the problem is now, of course, that if somebody knows about it, that this condition has been at least looked at in a semi-serious way. Everybody who's because there's over the cases that I've known who have been linked to power lines, mobile phone masts, even living next to electricity substations. Mm-hmm. I've never, perhaps I just haven't read the right documentation, or the right cases, but they all seem to be revolved around the fact that they cause cancer. I've never heard of it being that they're just sensitive to the EMC radiation.
Well, I mean, in terms of causing anything, is there any evidence that they cause cancer either? You know what I mean?
I mean there isn't.
Yeah.
But I've never heard this side of it before.
Right. Yeah. I mean, apparently, in terms of sort of prevalence, what was this? There was a survey in 2007 in the UK of a randomly selected group of 20,000 people, and they found 5% reported the symptoms of this, which seems like quite a large amount. But then it's all self-reporting, and it depends on how the wordings, what the actual question is. It's like, if it's, do you find you sometimes have a headache when you're standing under a power line? People might do, but
it's a leading question that as
exactly,
well.
Yeah, exactly.
It was phrased that way, but the thing is, if you ask a question of, do you think birds contribute to global warming? You know what I mean? People will say, well, yes, but it doesn't really mean that they have that conviction, does it?
No, exactly. So it's an interesting one to keep in mind and see whether I think this is the fact that it's been reported this week. I've not heard of anyone ever winning a case for this. So it'll be interesting to see if now that it has been done. In similar articles, there was something about a school in America who were trying to sue a school because they'd upgraded their Wi-Fi or something, and their kid got a nosebleed. But I don't think they won that. But it'd be interesting to see if it gets recognised more, even though it's not recognised at all by any medical body, and what they actually report it as. So the reason I brought it up was just the fact that it's reported as being. If you read it and you don't sort of read, it's one of those ones, if you don't read the full article, it reads as she's won it because she suffers from this thing that's now been acknowledged by a court. But that's not the actual story.
That's how the Daily Mail would
well, exactly. I should look and see if it's on the Daily Mail. That would be a laugh.
Yeah. It's interesting because, there has been well, I thought there'd been a lot of research done in it, but I guess the research has been done for specific conditions, and that it hasn't been one. There's been a lot of research done on whether living near the power lines or living near the mobile phone masts causes cancer, and there is absolutely no evidence to state that. I don't know if any evidence, any research in the UK has been done on electromagnetic sensitivity.
Well, I guess on the cancer is just that. I think it's because cancer's so prevalent in the population, for one thing, that also that it's on the rise as a killer because other things are killing you less, and also because it's so multifactorial that it's hard to prove a cause. I think it's the same as what I was saying before, is that people are desperate for a singular cause. If the cause of their cancer is unknown, the human condition is to search for a cause. And it's nice for that cause to be external, not something you've done, or something, caused by a choice you've made. It's completely external. So I think that's why these things tend to get the blame, to be honest.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I know there are work guidelines for any engineers who are working on these type of things, and that they do have to have them switched off. So we know that if you're very close to a very high-powered something that's giving off electromagnetic radiation, then we know that there's a possibility something might happen, which is why they get switched off. But there's nothing to say that anybody living in close proximity or reasonably close proximity. I think what we're saying is that the radiation reduces quite quickly as further away you get from the emanating source.
Yeah, it'll be one of those exponential decay things, won't it?
Well, presumably they're trying to say that they're unique individuals, because the thing is, you couldn't really make the case that if humans generally were exposed, then this happens more frequently, because then the evidence would be so clear that people who work in the power industry, people who work in these situations, would be clearly the first. So I guess what she's trying to say is, well, I'm a hypersensitive individual, and therefore I'm at risk more so, but then still this external factor's to blame, but I'm a particularly sensitive individual, which is where, to me, I just don't see, in terms of evolution and things like that, I just don't, in physics, I mean, what would it be about someone's composition that would make them more sensitive than another human? We're all the same in that sense, and it doesn't sound very plausible, does it?
Exactly. I mean, in terms, like John said, in terms of sort of like the health and safety type stuff, any sort of electromagnetic radiation from anything will be, many, many factors less than any level that is considered to be in any way dangerous. I mean, I don't even know what the effect on the human body would be if you were next to a massive, massive, massive source of electromagnetic radiation. You know what I mean?
Well, I mean, the fact is we have microwave ovens in our kitchen, and the fact that a Faraday cage is good enough to protect, it doesn't seem to bother us.
Mm-hmm. I mean, a lot of people getting MRI scans.
Yeah.
If it was going to cause you bad effects, surely they wouldn't be used for.
Well, I mean, they are risk. I mean, they are. Every time you get an MRI scan, it is a risk.
Yeah, because the
risk is well understood, and
yeah, and the reason why, of course, that MRI scans drop the N off the front is because people would get scared if it had nuclear in front of it.
Yeah.
But that's what it. I always remember doing that bit. Part of our course was in digital and medical imaging and stuff. That was part of my degree course, and I, to be honest, I didn't know that it was a nuclear magnetic resonance imaging. That was the name of it, the full name. And they said basically they dropped it because people wouldn't like the nuclear bit.
But correct me if I'm wrong here, but wouldn't the physics tell you the answer with this, in that we know we're safe from, we understand why we're safe from microwaves in a microwave oven, because we know the wavelength, it's predictable, it's uniform. We know that if you put a metal Faraday cage, like John was saying, with this size gaps, that the wavelength can't physically escape, so it doesn't matter how many times you run it. If you sit with your face pressed against a microwave for your entire life, your risk is nil, because the microwaves can't escape. Yes, with a faulty microwave, where the shielding has been took off, your risk would be very grave indeed. But that's the thing, and surely it's the case with electromagnetism generally, that they know that the wavelengths are safe for humans, and therefore level of exposure, it doesn't really make any sense to ask that question, does it? It's like saying, what's the risk factor to level of exposure of bananas? I mean, well, none, because doesn't matter how many you have, they're not dangerous.
They're quite radioactive.
Well, that's
so Brazil nuts, don't they?
That's why I brought bananas, but they're not where it's actually a health concern, are they?
You'd kill yourself by overeating before you got.
Yeah,
I think the main thing here is that I'm not saying that she does not have something wrong with her.
Yeah.
I think that attributing it to electromagnetic radiation is possibly not her cause of her problems.
Actually, autism's another example of this, isn't it? With the whole heavy metals in vaccinations thing and stuff like that. I guess that's another one where people are keen to blame it on a well-defined factor, which actually scientifically doesn't add up. But nonetheless, this sort of myth persists because it's just easier to sum it up that way than say it's a thing we don't fully understand why it happens.
Yeah, that was a really popular one because of random celebrities getting behind it as well, wasn't it? Which is always quite worrying.
But presumably there has to be an appetite in the public for it, otherwise it wouldn't. You know what I mean? Celebrities say all sorts of nonsense every day, and yet it doesn't really carry any weight. It obviously taps into a fear in a psychological phenomenon. Yeah.
It's that desire to have a label, to have a cause, to have a certainty. Something where you don't know what causes it. People are inherently, they just don't like it.
But they're just more. If somebody promises to say he has a well-defined answer, people just find that much more satisfying. If you say, well, this is a more reliable answer, but it's really complicated and it's very uncertain, people say, well, I kind of prefer the certain one. It's like, well, yeah, but the certain ones could be a lot of bollocks. But people just psychologically prefer that, don't they?
Actually, have you got a double helix on your glass, Ross?
I have.
Wonderful. I just saw that. That's great.
It's actually from the Newcastle Beer Festival.
Oh, right. Okay. Fair enough. Anyway, so what we're saying is this woman has a psychological problem.
Yeah, basically.
And it's a great segue to go on to Richard's topic.
See what you did there.
You see what I did? Richard's going to talk about psychology and whether it's a science, aren't you, Richard?
I am, yeah. This is the...
And Ross is going to give the answer...
No.
There you go. So, next topic.
Well, actually, in that case, I'll start. I mean, how would you...
How do we define a science?
Yeah, well, how would you back up that assertion that it's not, I guess?
Because in my understanding of science is that it's got to be something that's objective and testable and provable, and psychology is subjective because it's like it's not observable and testable. It's subjective. It's, you know what I mean?
We're talking about here the science of psychology, so we're talking about something where it's an experiment has been done. So we're not saying it's not just an assertion by someone. This is obviously looking at experiments that have been done.
Yeah, but in terms of psychological experiments, don't get me wrong, it's a very useful subject. But is it scientific? I don't know. I don't know how it could be, because you can get statistics and stuff, I suppose, from mathematical models and stuff like that. But psychological tests, I don't know what a psychological. How good are you feeling today? Or something, I don't know. Well, how does this make you feel, or whatever? It's subjective results, so you can get a general, broad sense of stuff, and I don't know. You're not going to get accurate, testable, repeatable results in psychology, are you?
Well, so this is basically, you put your finger on it. Basically, this is the whole thing. Is this project is called the reproducibility project. So science has to be reproducible, and that's one of the tenets of modern science, is that you need to be able to reproduce it. So psychology has experiments, and this has been, people have been skeptical in the community for a long time now. Is it science? Is it not? And this is sought to find out. And so this is been run since 2011. It's called the Reproducibility Project. It's 270 scientists have taken part. They've tried to repeat experiments across 5 different continents. It's been led by a professor of psychology, who him and the other psychologists have looked at 100 experiments published in the top 3 psychology journals, so scientific journals, the top 3.
So that's Beano, Dandy.
No, these are.
I'm sorry, that was uncalled for.
The results of this study has been published in the journal Science, and the outcome has been very, very bad for psychology. Basically, they could only reproduce 36% of the original findings. They split it into 2 different disciplines. Cognitive psychology, half of that couldn't be repeated. Social psychology did appallingly bad. 75% could not be replicated.
I mean, something like that, social psychology, I'm guessing into what it is, but I imagine it's something that inherently won't be repeatable, because it changes. Social, norms and thoughts and stuff change. So
well, if you can't repeat it, I would agree with you. It's not science. I mean, it's something, and it may be useful. I mean, economics is a discipline that's fascinating, has huge utility, but it's not science.
Yeah.
So this is the thing. When people say, I say to people all the time who have alternative beliefs, shall we say, and it's some of them are interesting, and some of them are engaging, and some of them give you a nice, warm, fuzzy feeling, and I'm not poo-pooing all of that. However, when I say they're not science, I think you're basically saying it's
irrelevant.
It is, and
they're useful.
I mean,
useful. There are many psychological theories and theorems and postulations that can be reproduced and do have genuine background. Well, they are, they are used regularly and they can be reproduced, but not all of it.
Yeah.
I think this is the dead easy way of working out the problem with psychology. If you take a load of British universities, how many British universities offer a BA in physics? 0, because it's a science. How many offer a BA in biology or chemistry? 0. They're all BScs. They're all Bachelor of Science. However, there are loads that give a BA in psychology.
Well, some of that's just that it's easier to do, probably. Well, this is the thing. We'll get on to the bit. I'll tell you the rest of the findings of the study, and we'll probably largely agree. But basically, this is the reasons why it might not replicate. So, Ross was basically saying a couple of these. You could use a slightly different method. There could be different conditions. It could just be chance. The first finding was just a chance finding, or it could be a false positive, which obviously is the worst one of the 4. Basically, the first 2 have different method and different conditions. Now, they took care. They liaised. It's the first study of its kind to do this. They liaised with the authors of the original studies, which sure the methods and materials were comparable. Not only that, the sample sizes were large enough to give convincing results. In most cases, they were substantially larger than the original studies. So you can't really say, oh, well, this is just because he didn't do it as well disciplined. This is a huge thing that's been going on for 5 years. It's massive, the number of scientists that's been involved. It's so important. This finding is so important to the field. And even worse than that, even the ones where they could replicate the original findings, half of those, the findings were smaller than the original studies. So it's got a massive problem with it. The whole field's got a massive problem with it. And the speculation for this is it could be scientists leaving out data that undermine their original hypothesis. It could be the thing we've talked about before, the bias where journals are only publishing the papers. And that's what I would say. I wouldn't go as far as poo-pooing the field of psychology, but I would say that in its current form, it's not doing a very good job of being very rigorous. So that's the thing. A lot of it is bad, clearly, by this study. But again, this study will have to be replicated. Clearly, if we're gonna go down this line, they'll have to do another study like this and examine the findings from a different angle, from the same angle, whatever. But obviously, one study, you can't jump the gun too much. And the ones that passed the test, I've got 3 examples. One of the ones was people are equally adept at recognizing pride in the faces from people from different cultures. They rigorously tested that one; it still passed. Brain regions being activated when people are given fair offers in a financial game, that passed with a rigorous test. And an example of one that failed was encouraging people to believe there was no such thing as free will to make them cheat more. That failed. So basically the reaction is that they're very disappointed. Clearly a lot of these people are psychologists themselves and feel it's a valuable field, but they just feel as though part of the problem is also that the academics actually, to counter the point you were making before, to be a good academic, the lead of the study said this, that it's not necessarily the same thing as what it takes to be a good scientist, and that's been part of the problem. Doing good science and doing good academics is kind of goal-driven, and you're not wanting negative findings, you're not wanting to disprove the results, you want just to find something that moves that field forward, and that's kind of where that's been the downfall, it seems. But before everyone jumps on the bandwagon, and I think the Telegraph and the Observer have gone in with quite negative headlines saying it is all psychobabble after all. I think we want to be careful, because this study, they obviously plan on using this method to subject other sciences. This is just their first pick. They're now going to look at other things. If they look at clinical medicine and genetics, I think you'll find that they'll have, maybe not as bad, but they'll have a high margin of error, if not 50%. So what do you make of that? Is that kind of what you were expecting?
I would say so. I mean, I wasn't sure when I saw the question as being what we were going to talk about. I was thinking, have I ever actually thought about that question? Is it science or not? And is it something that's sort of like, is it a contentious question anyway? Do psychologists claim they're scientific?
Well, I've never been interested in the question. I hear people say it a lot because I'm a bit black and white about these sorts of things. I sort of think, well, you're asking if something's a science. Well, the only way to find out is to test it scientifically. There's no point in having an opinion on the matter to me. Like,
exactly, yeah.
Is it a soft science? To me, a lot of that is bigotry because it's a female-dominated field, or it has become one. That it's not thought of as a hard. This is hard. This is soft. Some of the stuff that John was saying about prestige and academics and what's recognised, and none of that tells you whether it's a good science or not. That just tells you, how culture sees it and how society sees it. So the only way to do it is to do what they've done here, is a huge test, try and replicate, and if you can't replicate, it's worrying, isn't it?
I think that the example that I did was the BA in psychology and the BSc in psychology, and I think there is a lot of there are some elements of the BSc in psychology which I would say borders on neuroscience, which we know to be a science. That's a medical science. Mm-hmm. And I think that when I was looking at some of the descriptions of the BA in science, it's just like, are you interested in some woolly areas of human makeup? In which case, this is what you need. If you want a little bit more scientific approach, well, yeah, you would do the BSc, and the BSc does have a lot more scientific elements to it, which are bordering on neuroscience.
Yeah.
So perhaps,
I reckon even I bet that field's even problematic though. But this is the thing. Going back to Ross's original point is, how would you even do like a hard scientific experiment? Well, you don't. It's not about that so much. It's just, will it replicate? Can you say, with this set of conditions, with this method, can anyone do it? And in which case, that's good science, because if it always replicates, it's a good finding. If it never replicates, or hardly ever replicates, or replicates less than chance, you've got nothing. Scientifically, you've got nothing. So it's not science, and that's the thing. Good psychology to me, is potentially a more useful thing than good physics in a way, because we are humans. Understanding that is much more empowering than maybe understanding how something theoretical in a far-off galaxy works, to me. But it has to be hard science in the same way as that physics is hard science. And then it's got huge utility. But if it's less than 50% reliable, well, it's got no credibility, and that's the thing, isn't it?
Hey, I tell you, I've got a doozy of a story next that proves scientific reproducibility and things off in far galaxies. Hey, that's going to be a good one. But yeah, you're right. You're right.
Medicine is one that's clinical medicine is a real worry, and there's a lot of bias. There's lots of pressures in that. Pharmaceuticals and government grants, and I went to a lecture on it in Newcastle, and they were saying about how little you have to do to get a metal hip replacement or whatever through a trial. Those things won't replicate because the community already knows that, and yet it's still the case that you can get these things to market, you can get these things put inside people, and probably they won't replicate. So it's not just psychology, it's psychology done badly, isn't it? That's really what we should be criticising. It's not the field, but it's the field being done badly, which unfortunately in this case seems to be the majority of it.
And I think, to be fair, people like Ben Goldacre have been banging on about this for a long time.
Yeah.
And he's just one example that I readily come to, but there are a lot.
Genetics. People in genetics have similar concerns that that's been a field that's been misrepresented a lot.
Well, do you think this is that whatever education that the scientists do, nobody teaches them correctly how to do scientific experiments and scientific research, and is that a huge core that we're missing out? Because in I guess in the average degree course, and now you might talking about this, Ross, was there anything about how to do correct experiments? Or was that inferred that you already knew that from coming from A level?
Yeah, I think that was all sort of inferred, that the sort of the basic scientific method and that sort of thing was never covered.
Well, then that's possibly a big,
But like you say, surely that is covered at A level.
Well, okay. I did GCSE physics and biology and chemistry. It wasn't covered there. We knew how to set out a standard aim, method, conclusion type thing. But that's just a very basic experiment. That doesn't bring in anything. Well, you did A level as well. So what did you cover that at A level?
I'm trying to think. I can't actually think that it was specifically covered.
I think you're right. I think you've got it there, though. I think it doesn't get covered, and I meet a lot of people who are in the field or have trained in the field, and they couldn't tell you what the scientific method is. And to me, that's very alarming. Yeah. I just wonder, is it that we live in an age where you don't want to be sort of too evangelical with it, where you don't want to say, look, it's this way or that, but it has to be. I mean, that is the whole thing. The whole endeavour is that, and people don't seem to be that familiar with it, and they're doing science, and it's like, I don't know how you could do something and not know what it is that you're doing.
I think that in a lot of occasions, this is, if you're standing in with a room of scientists, and the emperor's new clothes here is that some people do not know how to do basic experiments, genuine experiments that are unbiased, and everybody doesn't want to say, excuse me, I think we've missed something very basic here. They all just assuming we'll just bumble along.
I think you're both right, but I think probably in this case, the 100 biggest studies in the 3 most prestigious magazines, those people are completely familiar with the scientific method. So yes, you're right. It's from the grassroots. However, in this case, my assumption would be that it's more to do with the publication bias that we've talked about before. It's more to do with commercial pressures and external pressures where there's no real incentive to falsify your own findings. There's no real incentive to do research that somebody's already done. To do an exhaustive, expensive research over a 3-year period, finding all the candidates and putting it all through double-blind placebo and blah, 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 just to find out what someone's already found out, that there's no appetite for that. But if you want the science to be reliable, you absolutely have to do that. And I think that's where these fields, of which there will be many, are going to fall into disrepute, because you might as well not bother. If you're not going to do that, you might as well not bother, because you could find a chance finding. And animal studies is another one. I know I've banged the drum about that a lot. Do that. See if you can replicate animal studies, and you won't. You won't replicate. The reason that they don't translate into humans, I would wager, is not always that animals aren't a good model for humans. It's probably that nobody's attempted to replicate the study rigorously before that stage. So we'll see. But to me, it's one that probably won't be big in the mainstream, but in the scientific community, this is going to send shockwaves through the whole thing.
And like you say, it's just a start. If they're just starting on psychology, is that because it's like a low-lying fruit? It's an easy.
I think it's just the one that's the most controversial, so they wanted to start with that, and also the lead and the people who've set it up are in that field themselves, so they understood their own field enough to be able to replicate the experiments. But even then, it's took them from 2011, so it's took a long time. You can't rush it, and obviously they wanted the finding to be very robust. So they wanted to do 100 studies in depth, and like I said, the sample size is bigger than the original experiment. So that it was kind of, it's not beyond repute, but they wanted it to be a massive solid finding. And then if someone goes out and does another massive solid finding, then it's as good as you'll get as a consensus.
Actually, you brought one up there before we move on. Is it just because that genuine, well-defined experiments can take a lot of time, and B, a lot of money to do?
Doing science is hard. It's hard. Doing proper science is hard. It's much easier to do something else and call it science. Yeah. And I think that's the trap that people fall into.
Yeah, interesting. Well, I'll tell you what, Richard. Can you keep an eye out for if we get any more ramifications of that? Because that's fundamental in many, or across many basis of science. That's very good. And obviously, we'll keep an eye out and see what Mr. Goldacre says about all this, because I presume he has a view on this. I haven't seen it on his Twitter feed.
Reaction to it, but I would have thought he will have, yeah.
Yeah. Right. Well, and now we move on to something we've covered before. About in February, we spent most of the podcast covering quantum entanglement. This is when we had Andy Armstrong on, I think. And we did say, look, it's a very complicated topic, and that's why it can go on for a long time. So, but I'm going to try and cover it in about 10 minutes. Actually, I'm not. I'm just right. I'm gonna cover the basis of it, just to describe the story that I'm going to tell. But I might miss out something important, so I'm relying on Richard and Ross to correct me if I go wrong. So, the first thing you need to know, and we were discussing this in the pub. Some of my colleagues, Steve and David from Sage, were discussing this in the pub.
Where all the best scientific conversations
Absolutely, yes, it's true. So this particular story links into it, so I'm going to tell you about this. So quantum entanglement. You need to know two things. You need to know, I guess, the principle of locality, which is the classical physics side of things, and the quantum entanglement, which is the quantum mechanics side of things. So just to explain the principle of locality. Basically, the principle of locality in classical physics is that if you've got an object and it can only be affected or influenced by its immediate surroundings. So if you've got object A and you've got object B, if something travels from object A to object B and influences, that's fine, but it cannot affect it in greater than the speed of light. Okay, is that fair?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. That's the speed limit for information.
Yeah, and this was the belief that Einstein had. This was this is the one he was saying. This is the one that he stated. This is the way. It can't work any other way. It must be this way. Now, if we go into the quantum mechanics, so there's Einstein's side. Then you've got Niels Bohr's side, who was a Danish scientist, and he went for the quantum entanglement side, which is where you've got two particles, example, and two electrons, and they are entangled and move to opposite ends of the universe. Each particle, or each electron in this case, knows a lot about the other, but they don't send messages to each other. They instantaneously know each other's state. Is that fair assumption?
That's the spooky action at a distance.
That's the spooky action at a distance. And this is what Einstein called spooky action at a distance, and he just didn't believe it. So basically, Einstein believed that if you had two particles and did this move to the other end of the universe, that these particles already knew the outcomes of each other. So it wasn't actually instantaneously doing anything. It already knew the outcome.
Yeah.
And then there was a scientist called John Stuart Bell, who was an Irish scientist, and he put forward Bell's theorem, which is a mathematical equation. And this was in 1964. Now, Bell's theorem said that, well, it was a test that could resolve this and prove that if the entanglement had a local element, then there was like a limit that he proposed that you could, and if it had a local element, it would be below this limit. If it was quantum entanglement, it would be above this limit. So basically, he split the two entangled particles independently, make several measurements on it, and if it's below the limit, it's local, classical physics, and if it's above the limit, it's quantum. So that's all you need to know. That's your master's degree condensed in 5 minutes there. So the actual story that I wanted to talk about was essentially actually proving with a genuine experiment that Einstein was wrong, and that Niels Bohr, his quantum entanglement, was the correct approach.
Oh, right. I see, because I saw the headline about this recently. And it confused us a little bit because I was thinking, well, he's been wrong for ages. But I guess he was only wrong originally because the scientific consensus, went against him, and people started going down the other route.
Well, the problem is that, as with most quantum theory, it's difficult to when the theory was the original quantum mechanics was proposed, you didn't have the technology to prove it, and now we're getting to the stage where we can prove it, because this experiment has been done in the 70s, in the 80s, I think in the early 90s as well.
It's also because it's quantum mechanics. It's not proven. It's just highly probable. So
yeah. Well, okay. So yes. Okay. So the experiment they did was Cornell University in the States, and they had two little chips of diamond, and each chip of diamond contained a defect in the diamond, and that had an electron inside each of them. So what they did was they moved these two separate electrons apart. Okay, and each chip. So there was 1.3 kilometers apart, and this is the first problem. The first problem was the reason why there was a loophole in this studies before is that they didn't move them far enough apart, and there was some issue that the speed of light might have affected it, so they couldn't completely rule that out. So they moved it 1.3 kilometers apart. Diamond with electron in, diamond with electron in, and they blasted each of the electrons with lasers to get a photon. Each one produced a photon. And this photon, it entangled with the electron, so you've got a photon and an entangled electron, 1.3 kilometers apart. Okay? Now, the protons that came from the electrons were taken away and put into another lab in between the other two labs. So like sort of 0.6 of a kilometer between the two, or something like that. And then these photons, this is where it gets complicated, because now I'm thinking, right, have I got everything covered? These photons were fed through a beam splitter. I don't actually know what a beam splitter is, but there was one there and they were fed through it. And when they both hit the detector at the other end, at the same time, the photons became entangled. So what you have now got is two photons entangled, but they are entangled with their own electrons. Are you with me?
Yep.
Good.
Yep.
So, two photons entangled, they are subsequently entangled with their electrons. So they're all kind of, their states are linked. And, yeah, that's right. So, and then they measured, and this is one thing that I was going to ask Ross, actually, because I don't actually know about electron spin. I'm sure I did at one point. But this is the way that they measure it, isn't it?
Well, the entangled type, sort of the spooky action type thing, spin's used as a property that's measurable.
Right.
And you have, if you have two of them, you know that they're entangled, you know that opposite spin. And the explanation of spooky action is as soon as you look at that one and know that it's got this spin, you know the other one's got the other one. So right. That one has effectively become instantaneously. So spin is just a good thing to measure.
Right. So anyway, when they measured this, they found that it surpassed. They did all the maths on Bell's theorem, and they found that it surpassed his limit. So therefore, it was not a local classical physics.
So that's why they're saying now definitively it's usable. Right. I see.
Because in the test that they had before, like I said, one of them was they didn't move it far enough apart. Mm-hmm. So they couldn't completely rule out that there wasn't an effect of the speed of light in there that was communicating between. And the second one was the detectors were very poor. Now they've got much more efficient, much more the granularity on the detectors is much better. This is now, when they've done this experiment, they can now categorically say that Einstein was wrong. There you go. And there is one problem with this, of course, that because I think the idea
there's more than one.
But the idea is that they're going to try and use this for quantum computing, which we've also covered before, and quantum telecommunications and stuff like that. But one of the issues that they've got with this experiment took 9 days to collect 245 data points. So, you know, we're at the very start of this type of experiment. But
do you know what I find the weirdest part about it is that I kind of alluded to this with Andy, that I seem to be unnervingly too acceptant of it. But my kind of caveat to that is that I think it's so experimental, as good as it is, and as much as I want to trust it, I just think it's so experimental that what's the margin for error is just a total unknown, isn't it? Like, I think, you know, the whole observation thing, the observation problem, and
yeah, there's a lot of these experiments that the difficulty with it is that it can look very, very accurate, and look like it's proven something, and look like categorically this is what's happening, and then a tiny change in, like, they've measured something wrong, or the accuracy of something is not right, or something can just destroy the entire experiment. And that's why there is a bit of an unnerve about these sort of things, because they're very fragile experiments, because the margins and the things you're measuring are so accurate. And I mean, I've mentioned this before. I feel very uncomfortable with a lot of quantum mechanical experiments or conclusions or descriptions, and because a lot of it is like the description of what's happening is what we see is exactly as if this thing is happening. Therefore, if it's exactly the same as this thing happening, therefore this thing's happening. And I don't like that sort of logical leap, even though there's no difference between it happening and it not happening. Therefore, it is. It's sort of, I don't know. I don't like the split the action thing outside of Einstein.
Because it's a logical approach, though, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's easy for us to grasp that.
Mm.
I mean, and this is kind of, I'm repeating what I kind of said to Andy, is that I don't think it's distinct as a discipline in that sense, because at the end of the day, evolution is a theory. It's a theory that change happens over time. Okay, it's evidenced by the fossil record and whatever else. However, you don't actually see it, so it's as good as that's happening in the same way. I mean, you don't actually see it. You see traits, and you can obviously use selective breeding and things to see traits for real, but you don't actually see the mechanism at work. We now understand it's DNA, but in Darwin's time we didn't. So you could make the same argument about evolution at that point in time as well. It's kind of just conjecture, really. It's just intelligent conjecture. And so that seems to be the way that this is. The problem with that is he happened to have it completely right. Do we have it completely right here? Well, we'll not know for another 100 years, will we, presumably?
I mean, I'm gonna have to read the actual articles on this, because I mean, so fundamentally, is what they're saying that the speed of light is not a limitation in terms of data transmission. You know what I mean? Information traveling. Well, they're saying the spooky action distance can happen instantaneously.
Yeah, well, part of Bell's equation takes into account distance,
Mm-hmm.
and over a certain distance, the postulation is that the speed of light can't affect it. So,
so they're not challenging the lighting.
Ultimately, it's one of these things where if you think you have two things at a distance and you measure one, therefore the other one's something else. Well, the only way you can tell that other one's something else is by measuring it. And the fastest you can measure it is the speed of light. So therefore, even if the information travels faster than the speed of light, you can never test that, because you can only measure it at the speed of light.
Presumably they've got a way of finding out its former state or something like that, perhaps?
There must be some, or is it the fact that there's two measurements going on independently, but then does that not destroy the experiment? You know what I mean? It's one of those where I'll have to read about it and say exactly what's happening.
well, I'll post the actual paper, but I'll also post there's a précis of the paper, which is from the magazine for the Society of Science and the Public Interest. But the paper is complicated because I just looked at the pretty pictures, and the pretty pictures are quite good. They explain essentially what I tried to explain tonight, but there is a lot of calculation in there. There's a lot of calculus, and yeah, but I'll put that in the show notes. I think it's the best thing I can do. But yeah, I mean, we could if we started sort of like 3 hours ago, we could still talk about this one and probably wouldn't get anywhere. We'd just be going round to the same things that we started with. But I thought it was interesting.
The fun thing we knew what was going on, and suddenly go, eh?
Yeah, I thought I'd include it because I thought because we were talking about it in the pub, and B because we might be getting a little bit closer. However infinitesimally closer we're getting, this might be just pushing it a little bit further. You may find, however, that somebody has, because there was a lot of scientists involved in this. So in terms of peer reviews, there were a heck of a lot of people to peer review. So if
you touched on it in terms of any applications and stuff in quantum computing, it's still a very controversial thing, isn't it? Because they're still not entirely sure whether the quantum computers that are actually out there actually are quantum computers, are they?
Genuine quantum.
Yeah, there's a couple that have been, there's the Q wave or something like that, which was in the news not so long ago. I'm sure it's been a bit controversial.
There's a lot of because of the fact that the intellectual property is they're keeping it secret. They think that some of it is just optical computing. Just the speed of light, because it's very hard.
Well, presumably the acid test is, if it's instant over a huge distance, then it's got to be quantum, hasn't it? Because it has to be, hasn't it? Although, is that impossible to know, because at the end of the day you have to transmit at optical speeds to get the...
Yeah, that's why, like I said, my head starts to spin when it comes to this sort of quantum thing, because it's like, yes, that may happen, but you can't tell it's happened because you're limited in how fast you can...
Yeah, you're just observing the effect and not the actual... Yeah.
Exactly, yeah. And in quantum computing, I think it's a similar sort of thing. They've got computers that do things very fast, but that doesn't mean anything. It just means they do things very fast. And actually testing whether it's a genuine quantum computer, I'm not sure how they even do that.
It's an amazing time.
If they can't get into access to the actual way it's made.
It's an amazing time to live in, though, isn't it? Where you can do experiments, and you've got technology coming out of those experiments, and it's like, well, we don't really know how this is doing it, but isn't it amazing? It's incredible, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's like having fire for the first time, basically. And like, well, we've got what we've got here, but we've got something that cooks food, so isn't that great?
Yeah.
And I guess also the fact is, so far, the Bell equation is what people are saying that is the best way to just, that is the it could be that it's wrong. It could be that there's a fundamental constant that's not right in it all. But from at this point in time, this is the only equation that we have, and this experiment is the only one that's absolutely proved the equation.
We need another Einstein, don't we?
We need somebody to question it again, question it all again. I'm just wondering who that would be, Richard.
Just on a slight aside, did you see the thing recently about what's his name? Oh God, my mind's gone blank. Stephen Hawking. Talking about
that little known scientist.
Talking about the problem of information being destroyed when it goes in black holes.
Oh right, yeah.
That's fundamentally just, it can't happen. You can't destroy information. He just recently came out with a theory on what happens with that, and I'm sure it was something to do with the information gets smeared on the surface in a hologram. It's like, interesting. Apparently so. That's what he reckons.
Smeared on a surface like a hologram.
Yeah, it's like holographic data.
Come out with some odd things over the last 5 years, mind, I must say.
Yeah.
Like, not odd as in, like, groundbreaking, but odd as in, is his mind going a little bit?
Well, no,
I think anybody would tell him if he thought his mind was going.
Well, I mean, his mind, probably
Going.
after 5 years of Alzheimer's is still greater than mine. However,
Has he got Alzheimer's?
No, I'm saying his mind even like half destroyed would still be an amazing mind.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Right. Well, I think that's probably bang on reason to, because it's been an hour. Always, if we put something on quantum physics in it, we there's no way we could do it in 15
Actually,
minutes.
On the subject of Alzheimer's, I want to put a correction in because we had a thing where we're seeing our different understandings of it, and mine was definitely dead wrong about it does, because I was talking about plaques and it blocking signals and stuff, and I must have been thinking of something else. But yeah, Alzheimer's, it does definitely destroy the neurons, so I don't know what I was thinking of there.
Well, thank you for that. That's a correction. If this was a Guardian, we would put it on the front page. But
Really small letters.
Yeah.
If it was the Mirror, we would print it like
Yeah.
where you can't read it in the back.
Beneath the sex ads. Anyway, it seems a good place to leave it for this episode 39. We have got some administrivia that we need to talk about. First off is now we've decided that we're going to do audio exports of all of the vodcasts that we've done since the start. Last week's is already up on the blog. Blogspot, the Wonderstuff blogspot.com. What I'll do is, it's going to take me a while to do it because they're about 50 meg in size, so it takes us a while. At the moment, I haven't written a script to do it automatically, so I'll just plow through and see if I can write a script. But they'll all come on the blog. The second thing is that we have now got domains. Got wonderofstuff.com, .net, .info, and .co.uk, which I will be setting up hopefully this week. In which case the wonderstuff.blogspot.com will stop working, I think, unless I can work out how to get them both resolving. We are progressing. We are progressing. There will be an RSS feed for all of the audio. The caveat with the audio, of course, is that it is a video podcast. We do use visual matter to highlight issues and highlight points. So you'll lose that bit, but we don't use it that often. So most of it is just us three jabbering. In which case you'll not lose any of the high fidelity noise that comes from our...
Well, I wouldn't miss out anything on this episode, would they? Because we didn't use anything.
No, that's true. You see, there you go. So that would be perfect. And thirdly, or fourthly, or E, whatever whatever naming convention we were using, I'd like to do an apology for some iffy sound this week. Don't quite know what was happening, but Richard started off okay, and then he went really low, and then he came back up, and then Ross was crackling, and then it wasn't crackling, and then it was crackling again. I don't know. We'll promise to get it all solved next week for the 40th.
Well, I wouldn't promise that. We'll try.
Don't promise anything ever.
Well, we'll hope to get it solved for the 40th episode of the
Wonder Stuff. Your ball in the pot. It's been weeks.
Tell you, I think next week I might try it on my Mac. Okay.
If that works, I give up on life.
Okay. It will work. I've already tried it, so I just don't have an external mic for the Mac. So anyway, that's all for now, everybody. So until next week, say bye-bye.
Bye.